Okay, everyone. Before I begin, I have to apologize for any banging or loud noises in the background as they are redoing the roof on our apartments over the next month. So I'm recording this in an effort to prevent my presentation from being ruined by their obnoxious noise, which is continuous and nonstop. I think they are on lunch break right now, so I'm going to try to get this done and see if it'll work. I am recording this because they are scheduled to be working on the roof the day that I am supposed to present this. So I don't want to risk that they'll be loud and obnoxious the minute I'm supposed to present this. So we're going to record it. I'm going to try to make this as interesting as possible so I don't bore you to tears just reading my notes, but I do have to read some of the slides, so bear with me. There is a handout available with all the written notes from the slides so you can focus on the material versus writing it all down. And I have added a few video clips in, and I have them set to only play at specific portions of the video. So if it looks like it started in the middle, it probably did, but it was on purpose. And as much as I would like to take Professor Wilson's suggestion in the presentation instructions and attempt interpretive dance, unfortunately, I don't have any dance education, and so I may not be able to effectively communicate my point. So buckle up and get ready, or tuck and roll, one of the two. We are going to remedy some wrongs. I pulled this quote from our text this week because I think it encompasses the idea of the difficulty of punishment for national and international courts. That said, more than 130 offenders have been convicted by international criminal courts and tribunals over the past 3 decades. We are going to explore the various punishments and penalties these courts have used. I like the quote from Ms. Hannah. She is considered one of the most important political thinkers of the 20th century, and she is also mentioned by Ms. Elizabeth when she taught us about genocide. Now, there are 4 rationales to punishment: retribution, consequentialism, restorative, and expressivist. We will dive into each of them real quick. And I'm probably one of the few students that were still in school when corporal punishment was administered. I remember being paddled in kindergarten, but obviously can't remember what for because I remember being the purest heaven-sent angel throughout my entire childhood. Corporal punishments such as those like the poor man in the background here are receiving and the paddling I received in kindergarten are forms of retribution rationale of punishment. The idea behind this form of punishment is related to the Latin word retribuo, meaning I pay back, or an eye for an eye for the biblical scholars among us. This rationale of punishment violates moral and human rights, and in some cases can't be extreme enough to justify the crime committed in the first place. The public doesn't care much for this policy because there is a lack of accountability to the public, and it doesn't vindicate the victims of the crime. These forms of punishment tend to be humiliating, and we now know that humiliation is a violation of one's human rights, which is a big no-no. So Jeremy Bentham, a well-known utilitarianist, is in the background here. He's informing us on consequentialism. The idea here is that the moral quality of an action is completely determined by its consequences. Now, although utilitarianism is a consequentialist moral theory, it doesn't specify the desired outcome determined by its consequences, while utilitarianism specifies good as the desired outcome. The utilitarian idea is that we are morally required to do whatever produces the greatest total of pleasure minus pain. A major issue with the consequentialist theory is that the idea they have of aggregation theory of adding quantities to get a sum doesn't account for what the quantities are that create that sum. For instance, consider these scenarios. Scenario A, Snigglefritz is an evil serial killer, just the worst, most god-awfulest person you ever met. And Melvita, she's an upstanding member of society, just a beautiful woman, angels sing when she walks around. And one day, Snigglefritz goes to prison for his crimes. And Melvita wins the lottery. Makes sense. But then consider scenario B. It's the same setup, wonderful Melvita and awful Snigglefritz, except for in this scenario, Melvita goes to prison and Snigglefritz wins the lottery. The aggregation theory says that both of these scenarios are equal in that both situations achieve an equal sum of one good outcome. So next on the list is restorative justice, which focuses on the victim and restoring justice to them, accounting for the pain they have suffered. Restorative justice follows the idea that victims will be more forgiving, knowing that punishment is to follow. And Miss Ava Moses Core here, pictured in the background, is going to show us a phenomenal example of forgiveness. And it's a pretty interesting story as well. Please enjoy.
Belen had the opportunity to host a night with Eva Moses Core, a Holocaust survivor. She was born 1934 in the Christian village of Pots, Romania. There she lived the farm life with 3 other siblings. She and her sister Miriam were twins and would be the only ones who'd lived to see liberation from concentration camp. She was only 6 years old when the SS soldiers occupied the village, and 2 years later, she and her family would be transferred to Auschwitz.
The third day of the trip, we asked for water and the answer came back in German. I instantly understood what happened, and so did everybody else in our cattle car. We have been lied to. We were not going to Hungary to a labor camp, but we are being taken to Germany to be murdered.
As a twin, she was put under many cruel experiments as a victim of Nazi Dr. Joseph Mengele.
The one little detail that's important. If one twin died as a result of the experiment that he was trying to perform, then the other twin was killed. And those twins who died in the experiment did not die in the barrack. Those who happened to die in the barrack were dying because of the conditions in the camp, starvation, or some disease that they were not.
When she came to speak at the Roca Theater, I got a chance to speak with her in private about her story of forgiveness and how she overcame the fears of her past.
Forgiveness, in my opinion, and I struggle with that a great deal because people do not understand my forgiveness. Number one, it does not absolve the perpetrator from their crimes. My forgiveness has everything to do with Eva Core, and the world is always concerned, can we punish the perpetrators and then the victims will feel good?
She serves an amazing example, especially now that Pope Francis declared this year the Year of Mercy. For WBLN, I'm Belen had the opportunity to host.
I have to apologize. Some of these videos may not be full screen. And the reason for that is when I make them full screen, and then I go to turn them back off, I can't get it to go back to full screen without pausing the recording. So I may do that for some of them so that you can see them, but some of them I may just leave smaller screens. So I apologize if you're noticing that. Let's move on. Last on our list of punishment rationales is the expressivist rationale. Now, although it is not as moving as Miss Eva's story, this theory is related to Mr. Durkheim, who uses his talents to explain how society functions and develops through the ages. He tells us that crime is a healthy part of society when it is in equal balance with itself, because it reinforces the values that society holds. However, he felt that if the scale tipped too far towards crime, we would decay as a society. But if we had less crime, we would stagnate as a society. Allocating punishment is governed by 2 major principles, the principle of legality and the principle of proportionality. Legality is, as it sounds, the prescription of punishment by the rule of law. There are no definitive sentences for specific crimes in the international system as there are in the domestic system. For instance, in Arkansas, a capital murder conviction carries one of 2 sentences, life in prison or death. And a fun fact, Arkansas does not recognize life with parole or life without parole. Life is simply life in prison. There is no release unless you receive a pardon from the governor or you outlive your life sentence and pass away. Proportionality is related to the retributive theory, an idea that just punishment must be observed for the severity of the crime. Ultimately, both principles leave much in the air, lacking definition and precedents to follow for future crimes. It prevents courts from defining the severity of crimes universally and creates difficulty in providing justice for victims. Now, the general type of punishment is imprisonment, either for a specific number of years or for the rest of the offender's life. There is no sentencing Bible that sets a definitive amount of time on specific sentences. The sentences vary across the courts, and they also have the ability to impose fines. The ICC has a maximum penalty of 30 years, different than ad hoc or hybrid tribunals that have allowed extreme sentencing. For example, Liberian President Charles Taylor was sentenced to 50 years for the Special Court of Sierra Leone, as we will see in this video. And on a side note, if you happen to be in Professor Conta's class, or one of his classes, and you were to let him know that you were learning about this, I'm sure that he would have all kinds of wonderful information to give you about it, and he would enjoy hearing what you've learned.
Former Liberian President Charles Taylor has been convicted of aiding and abetting war crimes and crimes against humanity by an international court in the Netherlands. The ruling is the first conviction of a head of state by an international court since the Nuremberg trials after World War II, and it aims to punish Taylor for helping rebels in neighboring Sierra Leone conduct brutal campaigns that included murder, rape, and the use of child soldiers. Judge Richard Lussig said that Taylor, 64, provided rebels with arms, ammunition, and communication systems during Sierra Leone's violent decade-long civil war that ended in 2002 in return for slave-mined blood diamonds. Thousands celebrated the news of the conviction in Sierra Leone's capital, Freetown, where the International Court's proceedings has been watched closely. Taylor will likely serve time in Britain after a sentencing hearing on May 16. Rebel leaders from Sierra Leone have received sentences of up to 52 years. Former Liberian President.
Here's a bonus slide with a couple of videos detailing detailing a couple of prisons that inmates were held at as they awaited trial and were sentenced internationally. The first video about the Yugoslavia complex is almost comical to an American in the way they describe the facility. It seems a lot like a hotel commercial versus a prison. I am doing my honors capstone project on the Nordic prison system as a comparison to the American prison system. The Nordic system is very much like this one, and from my research so far, it boils down to two very different terms. For Americans, it's punishment, and for Nordic society, it's rehabilitation. I heard it put in interesting terms. The US produces good inmates, while the Nordic prison system produces good neighbors.
The Tribunal's detention unit is a remand centre, housing those accused who are in proceedings before the court. Since it began operating in 1995, more than 130 people have been held in the unit for differing periods of time. It is housed within a Dutch prison complex located near the Tribunal, and all visitors to the facility, family, lawyers or diplomatic representatives, pass through a variety of security checks before they can visit detainees. The unit has a current capacity to hold up to 84 detainees, all of whom have access to a comprehensive program of remand. Multiple cameras are located within the area to ensure safety and security within the communal areas of the facility. Visitors are able to make use of rooms set aside for meetings, and during the day, detainees may have visits from family or friends. While awaiting or undergoing trial, the physical or emotional welfare of detainees is of paramount importance. The facility has the responsibility to defend the dignity of all those detained and protect their rights, whilst their freedom is denied. And each detainee enjoys the presumption of innocence. To enable them to meet confidentially with their defence counsel or diplomatic or consular representatives, specific rooms are available. The unit allows the detainee to maintain as normal a life as possible, while ensuring appropriate security, The detention facilities consist of a number of residential floors with cells leading off a main corridor. Detainees are not separated according to their ethnicity, nationality, religion or class. Each cell door is fitted with a window in which guards may check on the detainee. All detainees receive equal treatment and everyone is allocated their own private cell, which at around 15 meters square exceeds international standards for space, lighting and facilities. And the unit is frequently inspected by independent agencies such as the International Committee of the Red Cross. Each cell is equipped with a bed, shelves, computer, hand basin and toilet. They also possess an intercom, which allows communication between the detainee and the security staff whilst the cell is locked. In order to protect the health and safety of the detainee, some rooms are equipped with a camera, which in specific circumstances can be activated to allow monitoring. When cells are opened in the morning, some detainees leave for court, while others may move freely around during the designated hours, meet informally with other detainees on their floor, play board games, relax and cook their own food. They also have access to satellite TV stations and newspapers from the former Yugoslavia. Each floor also has showers, as well as facilities for washing and ironing. Detainees are responsible for the general cleanliness of their rooms and the common areas. The unit provides comprehensive medical services for all detainees, which are overseen by the medical officer and his dedicated staff. Detainees also have access to medical specialists, to emotional counselling and physical therapy. All information related to the physical and mental health of the patient is confidential. Doctors treating the detainees report regularly to the detention unit supervisor any information relevant to the administration of the unit, or if they believe the physical or mental health of a detainee has been or will be adversely affected by any condition of their detention. While housed in the unit, every detainee is entitled to spiritual freedom, and they are permitted to meet with accredited religious or spiritual representatives. A small library is also housed here and available to detainees, and regular services and activities occur within this room. Educational and occupational therapy programs are also offered within the unit. Computer training and English classes are particularly popular, and the classes are run in this specially designated room. Art classes are also well liked, and a teacher visits regularly to give classes. Each detainee is allowed 1 hour of walking or other exercise in the open air. They also have access to this weight room. A gym is also available to detainees, where they may choose to exercise on individual machines or take part with other detainees in organized games, such as volleyball, football and squash. If a person is convicted of a crime, they do not serve their sentence in the unit, as it is not a penitentiary. Instead, they are transferred to a prison.
Okay, I added the Mahanga video to show a contrast to the Yugoslavian prison. because this gives a good visual to the theory the author of our information is trying to make about sentencing internationally not having a specific model to follow, and it can vary wildly from location to location. This is a stark contrast to what we just watched. We are back to work on our roof, so I'm going to pause this and see if I can find a better time. Okay, we're going to try to do this and see if it works. Victim impact plays an important role in sentencing as it pays tribute to individual culpability. Sentences at the ICTR, averaging around 22 years, are generally higher than sentences from the ICTY, where they average around 15 years. Now, because international human rights law doesn't set sentencing guidelines, sentencing can be a tricky concept for officials involved. Sentencing judgments begin with an explanation of the sentencing rationales, retribution, deterrence, incapacitation, etc., followed by an assessment of the criteria. Now, this slide is another bonus slide and talks about a couple of the gentlemen that have been convicted by the ICC and sentenced to prison. I will let these short videos tell you about their adventures with ICC, but just so you know, the information came directly from the ICC website other than the YouTube video.
The war crime of directing
a historic moment in an unprecedented trial. Ahmed Al-Faki Al-Mahdi says he regrets his role in destroying World Heritage sites in Timbuktu in 2012.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with deep regret and with great pain I had to enter a guilty plea, and all the charges brought against me are accurate and correct. I am really sorry, I am really remorseful, and I regret all the damage that my actions have caused.
Mahdi, an alleged member of Malian Islamist group Ansar Dine, is accused of leading rebel forces who burnt thousands of ancient manuscripts and destroyed historic shrines, mausoleums and a mosque. Under their strict interpretation of Islamic law, they were seen as idolatrous. The militants hacked away at the sites with pickaxes after failing to deter locals from praying there. For the first time, the International Criminal Court has classified the destruction of a cultural heritage site as a war crime. In 2013, the French military drove the rebels out of the city. The reconstruction of Timbuktu was completed in July last year. However, Ansar Dine continues to stage attacks across Mali. Earlier this month, the group targeted French forces in the north of the country. And the rate at which the assaults are taking place could make 2016 the deadliest since the militants emerged 4 years ago. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
The International Criminal Court has found former Congolese militia leader Germain Katanga guilty of aiding and abetting murder and the attack on civilians. The court has, however, acquitted him of the charges of sexual slavery and rape. Katanga was charged with 10 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity for an attack on a village called Bogoro by a militia group he allegedly commanded, the Patriotic Resistance Force. He now remains in custody waiting sentencing. He was charged alongside Matthew Gurjolo Chui, another militia leader who was acquitted for lack of evidence last year.
The idea of negotiating justice and punishment sits uneasily with the nature of international crimes. The multiple purposes of international criminal proceedings and the concerns of victims. It has only been accepted under strict conditions. And that was quoted by Stahl in 2018. Both the ICTY and ICTR have accepted plea bargains, but judges are not bound by them, which eases the tension behind the idea of a plea bargain. Plea bargains allow offenders to negotiate sentencing while allowing the prosecution to avoid a costly trial. They provide a currency for the prosecution to bargain for information and evidence involving more complex crimes and operations. The video here doesn't speak to international plea bargains, but it does speak about plea bargains as a whole and the trap they create. I think it is important for those of us venturing into the legal system to understand both the pro and con side of the legal concept. Now, society often sees plea bargains as a great way to negotiate sentencing without the cost of trials attached to criminal charges, but this isn't always such a good thing, as we will see here.
Imagine you're a public defender with a client accused of a serious felony. Your conversation almost always begins in jail. In the visitation room, you begin preparing him for the most important decision he has ever made. And he'll have to make that decision while sitting in a cage. The prosecution has offered a plea bargain. It expires soon. If he accepts a guilty plea, he'll get out of jail sooner than if he goes to trial. Before the plea offer expires, your investigator tries to identify and interview the prosecution's witnesses. Are they unreliable? Making faulty assumptions? Lying? It all matters to your client's freedom, but you're operating in the dark because you don't know who those witnesses are. Why not just ask your client what happened? That might work if you were guilty. But innocent clients can't tell you what actually happened because, for the most part, they don't know. You lay out the options for your client. He could go to trial, but a judge may detain him, which means waiting in jail for months, if not years, before a jury hears the case. The idealist in you hopes that your client will fight. You think he could win. But the realist in you recognizes that if he loses, he will go to prison, potentially for decades. The other option is he could accept the plea offer. It would mean going home sooner. It's no wonder that 95% of defendants accept plea offers. It's also no wonder that so many people exonerated of crimes like manslaughter and drug offenses originally pled guilty. Your client signs the paperwork admitting to something that you believe in your gut he did not do. The judge asks you, does either counsel know of any reason that I should not accept the defendant's guilty plea? You want to shout, yes, Your Honor. This plea is the product of an extortive system of devastating mandatory minimums and lopsided access to evidence. My client faced an impossible choice. He is saying what is necessary to avoid the possibility of losing his life to prison. Instead, you reply, no, Your Honor. Imagine.
So I added this slide to give you an idea of what the large majority of people are charged with within the ICC court system. As you can see, it is mostly crimes with humanity. crimes against humanity, with 31 people having been charged. We then see 26 people charged with war crimes and 8 folks charged with contempt of court. Lastly, there's been 1 person charged with genocide. Definitely a stark contrast to the drug crimes and petty theft we see in our local courts, of course. So most of us are familiar with the idea that when someone is sentenced to prison, excuse me, they serve a portion of the time versus the whole sentence in our domestic courts. Many of our ICCs and tribunals do the sentencing themselves, but rely on the domestic courts to inform the sentencing. The ICCs and tribunals retain the authority to regulate and review said sentences, but enforcement lies within the states. Ad hoc tribunals have slightly different approaches. At the Rwanda and Yugoslavia tribunals, convicts were granted early release after serving 2/3 of their sentence. Consequently, this became the rule for International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals President Theodore Meron that dealt with the remainder of the cases. And if you don't know anything about Mr. Meron, I have just over time been seeing videos pop up where he's in them. He's a really cool man. He's somebody to Google and check into. But Mr. Meron argues that 2/3 of the sentence doesn't guarantee release, but that release would be dependent upon 4 criteria: the gravity of the crime, treatment of similar prisoners, defendant's demonstration of rehabilitation, as well as any substantial cooperation with the prosecution. The 2/3 rule has been criticized. The early releases are driven by cost-related concerns, and it allows for early release of genocide convicts and other severe criminals. At the ICC, early release is only allowed with the approval of 3 judges and genuine disassociation from the crime. The judges are also required to consider the victim when making choices regarding early release. And that is all I have for you today. I hope that I didn't bore you too terribly and that you got something useful out of it. Thank you for your time and attention and for your patience with the loud noises which are continuing to go on as we speak.